Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world today. My name is Steve Hall. I'm Head of Partnerships here at Procurement Leaders, and I'm delighted to welcome you to, well, I think it's one of our first stream webinars of the year. So Procurement Leaders produces a lot of research, but one of the ones that I'm particularly most interested in is our sustainability research stream. And we're delighted to be partnering with Integrity Next to bring you today's a preview, if you like, of some of the research that we've been pulling together. And particularly, we wanted to focus on a couple of key elements that we think will help you as you're looking ahead at your sustainability strategy through 2020 into 2021. So we're going to be looking at essential success factors to meet your sustainability goals. And we thought the best way to do that was to pull together a panel to help go into a little bit of a deep dive into some of the elements of the research, to provide that kind of market sensing kind of expertise, to really get a sense of what's going on across a lot of different corporations, and to provide a CPO's perspective as well. So kind of how are companies seeing this, how their sustainability journey is playing out. So we're delighted to be able to kind of pull together a great panel today. I'll introduce those guys in a moment. But I wanted just to kind of give you an idea of how today's going to run before I bring in our team of experts. So one thing I wanted to just make clear right off the top is we would love your questions. At any point today, from now on, any point, you can see the box on your screen. If you're listening live, please do enter in your questions. Let's get those across to our panel. We will have a dedicated Q&A phase in the sort of second half of today's webinar. And we will put your questions across to our panelists. So don't hesitate anytime, put those in. And of course, do keep an eye out for the follow-up that we will provide after today's webinar. We'll be looking to share materials, share follow-up, share slides where we're able to share slides with you as well. And so if you've tuned in for today's webinar, you'll be receiving that as part of the follow-up there. So let's have a look at today's panel. It'd be wonderful to meet them. So we're going to be hearing from Sam Rest. Sam is a colleague of mine. He's a principal analyst, and he focuses on sustainability and innovation. So Sam, you get the sexy topics of the procurement world. He's worked in both journalism and research. He has a background in editorial management and market research. And here as a principal analyst at Procurement Leaders, he oversees the research and advisory on sustainability. As I say, he's running a lot of groups. Running our collaborative value creation groups, focusing on research and advisory with our wonderful network, where he's pulling out a lot of insights on sustainability. And he's really been spent many months focusing on understanding sustainability better and sustainable procurement, and he's going to be sharing some of his findings today. We're also very lucky to be joined by Marcus Mergler. So Marcus is head of global procurement services at Clariant. He's been working in the chemical industry for more than 35 years. His career began in 1981 with Hooks as an apprentice, but he's come a long way since then. You know, he's headed up an e-business for Celanese, led the specialty graphite business at SGL Carbon for 5 years. I mean, Marcus, I'm not going to go into every single piece there, but there's some really great stuff in your on your CV there. He joined Clariant in 2011 as head of European master batch business and was appointed as CPO in 2017. So he's very much a kind of leader in the thinking around sustainability these days, and particularly that's something Clariant have been on a real journey with, and we're looking forward to hearing from him about some of the work that they've been doing. And finally, I'm very keen to bring Nick Heine into the conversation. Nick is head of sustainability and compliance with Integrity Next, but of course, he's one of their founders. He's a co-founder there at Integrity Next. He'll tell us a little bit more about what those guys do, but suffice to say, for the moment, he's a subject matter on supplier management with risk and compliance, and being head of supply sustainability and compliance excellence with his organization, he's very much able to provide a real broad and expert view of how organizations are facing up to some of those challenges around improving their sustainability, improving the sustainability of their suppliers most specifically, and working towards better compliance across their supply chain. So that's something I'm very keen to kind of bring Nick's viewpoint to the table as well. So there's lots of different areas, perspectives that we really want to bring in. Before we do that, I thought it made sense to kind of set the scene a little bit. We want to talk about these essential success factors to meet sustainability goals. And when we set out at the start of 2020, that seemed like a noble kind of cause. That's something that we were very clear on what we were trying to do. But things have changed, right? The world has faced a lot of disruption. And so it seems like it almost doesn't make sense to go too far without recognizing, guys, things are slightly different as they may have been if we'd had this conversation back in, say, February, right? So maybe we'll just do a quick round the room before Sam, before I give you a chance to kind of move into the research. Sam, I'm going to ask this question. I'm going to start with Marcus. and then we'll get into your presentation piece. But Marcus, let's go with you first. How much and in what ways do you think the sustainability priorities have changed in the wake of COVID-19? Maybe you can share a little bit of your perspective there, Marcus. What do you think?
I think it has changed in the definition of resilience of supply chains. I think we have become more concerned about length of supply chains, about how far away suppliers can be, and of course then affected by certain things, like in this case by an infection. But we should also not forget that this was not the crisis. We had several crises in the past also, which we had to manage. And the question is how resilient your business is and how resilient is your supply chains.
That's a good question, and it's definitely on everyone's lips at the moment. It's probably one of the number one things we get asked here at Procurement Leaders is how do I think about sustainability? What do I need to do to become more resilient, though? That, these things to some degree are kind of going hand in hand. Nick, I want to come to you as well. Welcome to the call, Nick. I'm going to repeat the question. How much and in what ways do you think sustainability priorities have changed in the wake of COVID-19? What's your perspective?
Thank you, Steve. So, yeah, right. You know, in the beginning, Corona has actually paralyzed a lot of activities. And we also noticed that, so, we are a platform that monitors supply chain sustainability. So we directly feel the pulse if companies are interested in that topic anymore. And of course, it has paralyzed a lot at the beginning. But now, after a few months, it turned out that COVID-19 has actually more accelerated sustainability priorities. So, we observe a strong increase in the interest in our platform, and it has definitely become a topic of the CEO agenda. So we mainly speak with CPOs and sustainability people in procurement, but it really, nowadays, we see that there is a demand from the CEO to supply chain organizations or to procurement organizations. So from our perspective, Corona has changed consumer behavior. So it's kind of the explanation, I think, behind it. It has changed consumer behavior, and sustainability has become definitely a competitive advantage for companies. So it's more an acceleration at the end of the day. That's what we see.
I think that's fascinating. We had I was running a webinar yesterday to do with the future of travel, and the question of could this be a tipping point where things actually really do change, in terms of how businesses run, kept coming up. People really wanted to know, do we see meaningful, sustained change? And I do wonder if what you were saying there, is going to bear out over time. Do we think that maybe this is the occasion where organizations are going to start to actually jump this up the list? Sam, I'd love to hear your perspective. Again, how much and in what ways do you think sustainability priorities have changed in the wake of COVID-19? What have you seen, Sam?
I would agree with a lot of what Nick was just describing with the kind of deprioritizing of sustainability and then the acceleration of it as well. I think it really varies on the organization, though, that you're speaking to and where they are currently on developing their sustainability strategy. Certainly, I think for a lot of the companies that we work with, the procurement leaders, sustainability has become a second priority next to cost management and cost savings in the wake of COVID-19. But similar to what Nick was saying and what Marcus was saying before, I think COVID has really highlighted as well the fact that a lot of organizations don't have visibility of what's going on in their supply chain, and especially deep in their supply chain in tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers. So for some companies, definitely there has been an acceleration because of that, and there has been better stakeholder buy-in into procurement sustainability, as Nick was saying, from CEOs, for example, because they do recognize that if another crisis like this was to happen, then they don't necessarily currently have that visibility of what's going on deep in the supply chain, and a good sustainability program can provide that kind of clarity. So a mixture of responses, I think for the most part, companies maybe fall in the middle of those two reactions of deprioritizing and accelerating, but there's definitely a variety of responses.
Absolutely. And it comes back to that point. I do wonder if organizations are truly going to buy into this as a competitive advantage now and start to, I guess, invest time, resource, focus. It'll be interesting to see. And if they do, well, this is maybe where we need to come in here, Sam, and start thinking about these essential success factors, right? So let's roll that into your what you've come here to share today. So tell us a little bit more about the research and about some of the findings that you guys want to share.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Steve. So as you mentioned in the introduction to the webinar, we carried out some research early this year with the Procurement Leaders Network on what they're doing around supply chain and procurement sustainability and the challenges and success factors, as you say, that they've experienced in doing so. We surveyed around 100 different companies from different industries and with different job profiles. And I'm going to highlight just a couple of the findings from that research. The report itself will be released later this year with the full breadth of the research. First of all, I mean, just to look at why procurement is a relevant function to involve in sustainability. Procurement isn't necessarily the first part of a business that someone might think of when you are thinking about corporate sustainability and improving the sustainability footprint of a business. But when we look at modern day supply chains now, we find that the majority of their impact on a whole range of different sustainability areas is now concentrated in their supply chain. So if we look at the environment, if we look at human rights, and if we look at other sustainability areas like labor relations, we find that the majority of the average company's impact is within their supply chains. As you can see here, at least 50%, sometimes going up to 65% of their impact. And this is an aggregated average across the different companies that we work with, procurement leaders. If we were to look at other sectors like consumer goods, for example, that percentage tends to increase. If you're involved in direct areas of spend rather than indirect, it tends to increase once more. But certainly, I think regardless of the kind of company that you work in, you will find that the majority of your impact on different sustainability areas is in the supply chain. And therefore, if you really want to make a difference with your corporate sustainability strategy, you need to start looking at your supply chain and how you can start reducing these percentages. But definitely there are some barriers and some common challenges, I think, that procurement finds itself falling into when developing a procurement sustainability strategy. I've highlighted just two of the barriers that come out of the research here, one that is external and one that is internal. On the external side, as you might expect, the sheer complexity of modern day supply chains is a massive barrier for most of the companies that we work with. 73% came back and said that it's a real problem for them to overcome complexity of supply chains and understand where sustainability impacts exist across the entire value chain. And then on the internal side, I mean, procurement teams, as I mentioned before, have not traditionally been set up to work on corporate sustainability. Procurement traditionally has been set up to work on cost management. And therefore, for a lot of the companies, as you can see, 75% of those that we work with, they say that there's a lack of clarity on who ultimately within the procurement function should be working on improving sustainability and where responsibility lies. And I think if you want to make improvements on this topic, you need to tackle both that external problem and that internal problem as well. But looking at some of the solutions, so on the external side, first, what you can do to try and gain better visibility and make improvements. One of the findings from the research was that, yes, compliance is a key part of sustainability and is usually something that companies undertake. But the best performing companies, I think, that we work with have a compliance approach, but they combine that with partnering and collaborating with their suppliers as well. Now, this won't be possible with the full breadth and the entirety of the supply chain. If we look at the full scope of activities, most teams will be looking at compliance monitoring and auditing. But for some suppliers who have a real impact on your sustainability as a company, it does require sometimes that you start partnering with those suppliers, working with them on joint projects in order to bring down that impact and make sure that they're fully in line with what you're trying to achieve on a corporate sustainability level. And I've highlighted a few examples of what these collaborative, partnership-led projects might look like. Firstly, from a beverage company that we work with, working on a technology solution with a supplier that reduced CO2 emissions by 2%. A similar example from a consumer company working on improving CO2 in manufacturing. And finally, from a closed company there working on water management and energy efficiency, which then resulted in a reduction of 20% of CO2 emissions. So looking at those kinds of projects in conjunction and in line with what you're doing on a compliance level, I think is really key if you want to really affect change and bring down some of those impacts that I mentioned in the opening slide there. And then the second thing that we found was just on an investment level, having budget to work on sustainability. We find that companies that have a dedicated budget to work on this topic are far outperforming those companies that are trying to do it on a shoestring budget, so to speak. And one of the areas that those companies are investing in is technology platforms, working on technology platforms that give them better visibility of what's happening in the supply chain. we looked at the different activities that procurement teams typically undertake when they are developing sustainability within the supply chain, all the way from a code of conduct to those collaborative projects that I mentioned before. And in every instance, if you are utilizing technology platforms, then your performance across all of those activities tends to increase. And I think later in this webinar, we're going to be hearing some more about technology platforms and how they best can be utilized. But we would certainly encourage companies to look at investing in something like this if they want to gain that better visibility. And then on the internal side, what you can do internally, I mean, we found really that a lot of companies don't have a formal operating structure for improving sustainability in the supply chain. And that problem that I mentioned in the introduction there of a lack of clarity in roles and responsibilities, you're much more likely to encounter that problem if you don't have a formal approach for sustainability within your procurement team, a formal operating structure. If you have a formal structure in place, as you can see, only 23% of companies came back to us and said that this was a problem for them. So if you don't currently have a structure in place, and we find that a quarter of the companies that we work with don't currently have an operating structure for sustainability, then looking at establishing one and communicating it throughout the procurement function is definitely something that you should be considering. And then finally, on what these operating structures look like and what they are in practice, I think it really comes down to how much you centralize or decentralize out responsibility for sustainability within your procurement function. Typically, from the research we found, that teams start with a centralized structure where you might have a head of responsible sourcing or a head of sustainability. Within procurement, they might have one or two direct reports under them as well, and it's their responsibility to work on sustainability. But increasingly, as companies improve their sustainability efforts, they start to decentralize out responsibility across the entire procurement function to category managers and to buyers, and ensuring that they have KPIs and metrics and are being assessed on how they are approaching sustainability in their particular segment of their procurement role. And I think the best procurement teams that we came across, the most effective ones at sustainability, had entirely decentralized their responsibility and made sure that it was the responsibility of different category managers, like I said, different buyers, to make improvements, rather than having efforts and responsibility existing in just a certain section of procurement where it can be more difficult perhaps to make systematic change and make sure that you're affecting change throughout your entire supply chain. And then finally, before I hand over to you again, Steve, some of the things that we recommend companies do when they're starting out on building their sustainability strategy. First of all, determine the amount of impact your supply chain accounts for sustainability within your organization. And this will differ depending on your industry and depending on your kind of business. Like I said, in the consumer sector, the percentages of impact tend to increase, and companies tend to concentrate largely on human rights and the environment. That might differ depending on your own business model, but determining where impact is and what you need to do to make improvements is firstly, I think, what you should be concentrating on and building the business case for procurement's involvement. Secondly, looking at compliance, like I said, but also combining that with collaboration and working directly with your suppliers to make improvements. That's the most effective way, I think, of bringing about change in the supply chain. And then finally, looking at the structure for procurement that you have in place. If you don't currently have a formal procurement structure for dealing with sustainability, start to establish that. Perhaps look at hiring a head of sustainability within procurement. But as I said before, look at eventually decentralizing out responsibility so that it is the responsibility, yes, of a head of sustainability procurement, but also of your category managers and your buyers as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sam. And I would cut you off just before the end of your that was fantastic. Look, thank you very much. Really interesting to hear, and it's good to get actionable with this sort of thing, right? Because one of the key things we see is that we have to learn from each other as organisations. Particularly thinking about some of those more immature functions who are just starting out on their sustainability journey. They can learn from those who've gone before, and maybe this is a crucial occasion to do so. Thank you so much for sharing the research that you've been doing. Great stuff. So I'm very keen to hear a little bit from you now, Nick. Maybe we can hand over to you. And particularly, maybe if you could start off and give us a little bit of background on Integrity Next and what you guys do. And then we'd love to hear your perspective on this topic of kind of essential goals that organisations should be focusing on.
Wonderful. Thank you, Steve. Thanks for having me, and start with a little bit of background on Integrity Next, the company my two co-founders and I founded 5 years back. So we all have met at IBM, and we had a procurement or procurement solutions background. But we always struggled with the fact that most procurement apps were highly configurable and complex, but empty. So in terms of data and content. But especially in sustainability and compliance, there is a complex regulatory and high need for content from experts and supplier information to share. So we decided to create a cloud platform that enables every size of companies to monitor all their suppliers with the help of technology, automation, and also AI. So today, 5 years later, we have around 100 customers monitoring over 650,000 suppliers in 140 countries regarding sustainability and compliance. And as you can imagine, we talk a lot with our customers, and especially with their suppliers, actually, about what makes a sustainability program successful, because it's all about the participation of the suppliers, right? They need to give you information, you need to be able to monitor them. That's very important. So from that experience, I brought with me 5 tips, which we talk a lot about with our customers and their suppliers. So actually, the first one is kind of obvious for probably most of you guys in the audience, because most of you are probably procurement professionals. But it's not necessarily obvious for your CEO and for corporate communications and so on. So you as procurement professionals, you spend billions of dollars or euro. You manage thousands or tens of thousands of suppliers. Your supply chains often are deep and global. They often reach into poor countries with high risk of child labor, modern slavery aspects, poor working conditions, corruption, etc. So you are all aware of this. But in recent years, legislators, consumers, and also investors has also become aware of this unique position of procurement regarding the impact on sustainability. And especially the legislators came up with a whole bunch of supply chain related law. So believe it or not, we in Germany, I'm from Germany, we are about to launch a law even called Supply Chain Act. So it is about supply chain responsibility. And it's really focused on procurement activities and what happens with different players and partners in the supply chain. So my advice, my first one is, so when you set up a sustainability program, make sure you make procurement and the supply chain really a central element of it, right? And I think this is something we already saw from Sam and the survey you brought out. So I think that ties in very well. Secondly, most companies look at top spend suppliers. So this is a very classic approach in procurement. Bear in mind, this approach does not work with sustainability. Others run a so-called materiality analysis. So that's another approach to find out where are the areas of risk and which are the related suppliers. So let's say there is cobalt with conflicts in certain region. There is the aspect of child labor when you talk about chocolate and cocoa. So these things are kind of obvious, but this is let's say a much better approach, right? But let me tell you, we think sustainability, we observe that sustainability is a moving target, and the public perception picks up on new topics like every other day. And you have to be among the first to know these topics to prevent damage to your company's reputation. I'll give you an example. So have you ever heard about Canna Uba wax? A year ago, I wasn't able to pronounce this name. It is an ingredient, and it's a tiny little layer around gummy bears. There's a company in Germany called Haribo. So they care about sustainability, but what they didn't spend too much attention on was probably this kind of Uber wax which surrounds their gummy bears. And unfortunately, this wax comes from palm trees, mainly in Brazil. And the workers working at these palm tree plantations, they work under slavery or similar to slavery conditions. So there was a TV team coming up with that. They figured it out and they brought it to TV, and there was a whole shitstorm for several months for that company. So yeah, it is really you don't know what you don't know. And you can't really just focus on the topics which seem material to you. Other topics can come up. And consequently, that means that you better try to monitor almost all of your suppliers. Doesn't matter if they are small, indirect, tail end, they all can bring you into trouble because they're business partners, and people will make you liable for their malpractice at the end of the day. So I know this is a huge amount. I talked about it earlier. It can be a couple thousand, couple tens of thousands of suppliers. One of our customers even way above 100,000 suppliers. But this is actually where modern technology comes into the game. So modern technology and also AI already. You can think about AI what you want, but there are some things that technology and AI can do. And it's definitely to handle a huge amount of data and different players. So it will help you to identify those suppliers which need your attention, and then you can focus your limited resources on those suppliers. So this is really my advice to not stick with the old approaches of 20% of my top spend suppliers represent 80% of the spend volume, and this is why I focus on them, or this kind of things, right? But I think that's a real important point. Number 3, many companies and industry associations try to create their own sustainability standards, and I think you should almost forget about them. They are not successful. This is what we observe. Why? Because international laws do not listen to these self-made standards, mainly. I know very few. Let's say conflict minerals reporting template is one of it, which really became a huge standard, but many did not. And the reason why is there are leading international standards already since years. ISO, GRI, UN Global Compact with the SDGs, International Labour Organization, SAI, all of these standards are available already. And regulators and also the public will measure you with the measures of those existing standards. So my advice is use them when you set up your sustainability initiatives. Yeah. I mentioned this topic already a little bit. I think it is a really huge challenge to comply with this rising tide of regulation and consumer demands. This can be intimidating just because of the sheer amount of players, of business partners, and to achieve transparency about tens of thousands of direct suppliers. And as required in some of the legislation, also get transparency about a multiple of that in certain supply chains. That seems impossible. But actually, this is what technology is for. So make it an essential part of your sustainability strategy. Modern apps contain the latest legislations. Yeah, they're always up to date. AI scans the internet and social media 24/7 for any malpractice of any kind of business partners you work with, directly or indirectly. And it brings risky suppliers to your attention. So my advice is make a smart bet on technology when you start your sustainability initiative, if you haven't done so. And last but not least, it's all about talking about your achievements and set targets and make a plan how to achieve them, but step by step. What we see is that regulators don't expect to be your company at 100% immediately, right? So they want to see you moving, they want to see you making progress. So start with, as we heard earlier, with a responsible person or a team for sustainability and compliance and procurement. Set up targets for the next 5 to 10 years in the recent areas. Set up first policies, and of course use technology for that. And we advise to even report on your achievements, even if these non-financial reporting laws which exist all over the world don't force you to do so. Why am I saying that? Because it's effort. And why am I saying that? It is for two reasons. One is the sheer existence of your team and policies and your targets and the communications or your report on that. The sheer existence of these elements will make a difference when it comes to liability for the practices of your suppliers. So we see that companies are made liable for practices of business partners, and it is really like something that we see since years in the aspect of compliance, right? You can be made liable, but if you have set up a team, a compliance department, if you have set up your code of conduct and targets and policies, you train your employees and things like that. This always makes a difference when it really comes to the point of liability, right? So this is actually one point where I think it's worth to report on sustainability achievements. And the other one is, and this is what I will close with, it's companies have actually understood that sustainability has already become a competitive advantage. So it really brings you in a good position. I keep hearing companies when politicians say, oh, well, during Corona, we try not to force and burden our economy with additional regulatory regarding sustainability. And there is a real large and growing group of organizations which really say, no, keep it like it is. The issues that we have, these number one problems like climate change and so on, these won't change because of Corona. It won't change. And also on the other hand, we have already invested in this, and it is a competitive advantage for us because we, especially now when you want the consumers coming back and start consuming again like before Corona, you need their confidence, and you will receive consumer confidence with more sustainability and integrity also in your supply chain. So speak about your sustainability activities and also report on it. Thank you. Back to you, Steve.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Nick. And, it very much strikes me that now is very much a time for this to happen. You talked about technology, you talked about the achievements. This is a phase where people are paying attention, where they are looking for answers, where they are perhaps prepared to invest in these areas. So it very much is, this is an inflection point. So I think you make some very some key points there. Before I hand over to Marcus, I just want to remind you guys, if you have any further questions, we've had some coming in already. We'll have a chance to kind of move to the Q&A section in a bit. So if you do have any questions, don't hesitate, get those in the box there. Marcus, we'd love to hear a little bit more about Clariant and the journey that you guys have been on as we're trying to think about success factors for sustainable procurement. So maybe you could introduce that for us.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Steve. Trying to move the slides. Now they do. Yes, hello, my name is Marcus Mögler. I'm working for Clariant out of Switzerland, which is a specialty chemicals company. We have sales of about 6 billion Swiss franc. We employ about 15,000 people worldwide. I'm CPO for this company about 3 years now, and I think Clariant has been in the area of sustainability for some time. In already 2014, Clariant developed what we call a strategic goal, one of 5, which was add value from sustainability. This was actually the start when we looked in Clariant as sustainability, not as, let's say, another thing we need to fulfill. It was to develop sustainability as a differentiator towards our competition and as a differentiator that is recognized by our customers. And in this respect, you have to understand that when we talk about customers in Clariant, we have a number of customers who supply into the consumer goods area, like cosmetics, like detergents. We have customers who put our products into adhesives, so we supply additives there. We have, as a special companies, products that expose ourselves relatively close to consumers. And with that, the requirements of consumers arrive to us as a chemical company quite early. And this is where I make our first statement. We need to look as procurement how we can provide a differentiator to our sales departments, how they can market the value chains and the transparency of our value chains actually to our customers. And being aware of what our suppliers are doing isn't enough anymore. And I think Nick mentioned it, we have thousands. I think at Clariant we have 35,000 suppliers. So how can we be really responsible for them? How can we take responsibility for their performance in terms of sustainability when we talk about work ethics, when we talk about human rights, when we talk about corruption? So there is, of course, a need to establish information systems that give you that information on a constant basis. And once you have that information, of course, you need to act on it. You need to mitigate, you need to educate, you need to work with your suppliers, how they can improve their performance towards a better sustainability performance, a better environmental performance, or keeping the employees more fair. We estimate that very soon in your purchasing decisions, there will be certain KPIs or metrics that relate to risks, that relate to sustainability. We, for example, in the chemical industry, talk a lot about the CO2 footprint, the greenhouse gas reduction initiative that's coming out of the European Union. This has a direct impact on what we buy, where we buy it, and when we buy it. What is the technology that our suppliers are applying to make a certain chemistry? What are they doing in that technology to reduce their CO2 footprint? What distance do I have to bridge in order to get that product from the supplier into my factories because it produces CO2? These aspects will become an equation in the decision where I will buy my products in the future. And when we discussed earlier the impact of COVID, here I think COVID has given a notice that long supply chains may be more risky. Long supply chains may be more difficult to manage in times of a crisis. All given that, prices in China, in India may be better. But if you look at the total equation, buying a product maybe close by at a higher price, but with a very much lower CO2 footprint, may be of a better benefit in the future. I'm not saying now, but it probably will come in the future, quite sure. And consumer-oriented value chains will come first. I think we have had discussions here in the panel before, coffee, we talk about the palm oils, but it's going to go further. Consumers will ask about the history of a product. Where is it coming from? How was it produced? And they want to have it on the label, or they want to find it in the internet. And if you look at the chemical industry, we are, of course, always somewhere in the middle. We are always somewhere providing a product in the value chain. We now have to reorient ourselves. And we discussed before, is it only laws and regulations? No, it's beyond this. It's perception. It's perception of the consumers that we need to respond to. And that brings me to the next chart. If you look at the things that we may want to know, and this list is certainly not complete. This list is I think, a selection of things we need to know about our suppliers and things we need to mitigate at our suppliers. So what are they doing in terms of human rights and labor? What are they doing in terms of environmental protection? Are they just following the laws, or are they doing a bit more in terms of compliance to the environment? What health and safety policies do they have internally? Do they have safety shoes for every worker, for example, in India or in Indonesia or in these areas? How they do on corruption? Do we see their names popping up in corruption cases? That, of course, very much depends on what industries are we buying from. Are we on any sanction list? Do we buy from somebody who may be on a sanction list, or from a country that is on a sanction list? How are they actually, and this is a very actual topic, how do they actually protect themselves against cyber attacks, them as a supplier to you? Because if somebody hacks into them, it is very obviously that then they can use data from your company. So how do they protect their system against cyber attacks? So here's a lot of, let's say, topics, but this is not all the topics that you may want to know. This is only examples that I'm using to explain that it's not only enough to know about the quality that your supplier is bringing, that the continuity of the supplier, the price, the deliveries. It's becoming a more in-depth knowledge that you have to develop and own. And this is, I think, the big difference to 2 or 3 years ago. You are now responsible as procurement for the selection of the suppliers and why you have selected them. And if you knew that a supplier, for example, has a bribery case, you are responsible in procurement and not somebody in sales or somebody in the management. So this is certainly changing. I would like to go to a very concrete industry example, and I'm allowed to use an example from L'Oreal, which I think everybody knows. It's a consumer product company, and it's a customer of Clariant. And they have a very clear structured sourcing policy, which is called solidarity sourcing. With that, they combine business objectives that you see on the left side, so the security of supply, the traceability, the quality, with giving business and ensuring business with so-called underprivileged groups, so that we make sure that these companies that are in this area get business from us, that we make transparent, that we have, for example, developed business with minority-owned companies, and that we ensure that when we do business with companies, that they have access to employment, access to income, and so forth. So L'Oreal requires us as a supplier to them to be very transparent on our value chains and what we're doing with our suppliers. And I would like to, I'm sorry I didn't go on this chart, but you see it here, yeah, left and right. So you see here on the right side, the underprivileged groups, and on the left side, the business objectives. And we went into a very much detailed investigation on one value chain for L'Oreal, which is a product which is called a camphor sulfonic acid, which is used in shampoos. And in this respect, we actually had to investigate on suppliers that are in pine trees in Indonesia. And then we started from these pine tree smallholders, farmers, and made our steps towards when actually Clariant comes into the place, which you see is 5 or 6 steps down the value chain. So you see that we had to talk to collectors in Indonesia, we had to talk to a converter company in Indonesia, then the product was shipped to India, confectionated before then we took it in Clariant India into our possession, and made actually the final product for them in India, shipped it then to Europe. So we had to engage all the stakeholders on this whole value chain to endorse a project that we said we want to make sure that when you work on this particular value chain for this final customer, L'Oreal, that you follow all these rules of sustainability, you have fair payments, you have work ethics, and so forth. We quantified each step of the value chain and looked at the volume expectations that there are, so that we actually had identified in the value chain the capabilities that are able to fulfill the demand of L'Oreal at the end. We initiated all the contact with the tier 2s and tier 3, tier 4, and made very transparent to L'Oreal who we are buying from and why. And how we are then, and this is the last point, how we're then monitoring the progress that we're doing with those partners identified in this value chain. So we have actually partners on the field to ensure the implementation of work ethics, of human rights, and things like this, monitoring all these suppliers. With that, L'Oreal awarded Clariant businesses we never had before. And this is actually where I believe sustainability and work with your suppliers on sustainability adds value and can add value. But it's a lot of work, a lot of preparation work you have to do. And of course, you cannot do this kind of in-depth analysis for each and every value chain. But now we have 1, 2, 3, 4 examples like this in procurement, and our buyers are now prepared to look at certain value chains and where we see a customer demand on the end, that we actually say it's worthwhile to investigate it and to make transparent all these value chains for our customers. So here procurement becomes really a business partner and is way beyond just being a service provider. So the changing role of procurement is that we are exposing and mitigating and migrating risks into sustainable buying, that we ensure that all sourcing and supplier management decisions are generating potential differentiators for the business. This is where we see sustainability as a differentiator. We also looked at advanced data mining. I think Nick mentioned artificial intelligence and analytics, same, so that we actually look at the risks that we are exposed to. So Clariant has a holistic risk management. We talked about this, I think, 1.5 or 2 years ago in the procurement leaders events. And of course, building on this risk management tools that we have lots of information about our suppliers available that we can actually use and apply by all the buyers to take mitigations. So for Clariant is important the way of sustainability, that it goes into the reputation from Clariant, that we would like to make sure that we have no value losses caused by our reputation incidents. We also think it has an impact on the value chain and the network control. So holistic monitoring along the value chain, suppliers, our own factories, and of course also our customers. We need to have transparency on the whole value chains. And last but not least, there is a financial impact, a margin stability due to differentiation. And here I'd like to close, because this was just a very short but very concrete example where I believe, and we in Clariant believe, that sustainability is not something that you need to have like ESHA, it was years ago, or prevent some incidents and accidents. We have a wave, we have a completely new, different consumer orientation where industries have to respond to. And procurement is very much at the forefront of this, because we have all the connections to the suppliers and the value chains in front of us. So that's how I would close. And Steve, if you take over again.
Great stuff. Thank you very much. And, you know, it is particularly interesting to kind of land on that changing role of procurement, how you guys are leading on this, because for a while we used to get questions like, who should be in charge? How does procurement relate to those? Increasingly, this starts to represent what procurement does and where procurement is able to provide that kind of competitive advantage. Guys, we've got about 10 minutes, so I'm going to kind of get to some questions quite quickly. I know that there's some of those have come in. Nick, I'm going to come to you first. I'll read this question out. How do you manage the data you need to measure and monitor progress on sustainability targets and goals? By data, I refer to your own data, supplier data, and is it embedded in the organisation or does it follow a separate process? So, Nick, maybe you could talk to us a little bit around how organisations might be thinking about using data to manage and monitor progress, particularly thinking about how you guys work with your customers. Maybe you could offer us a bit of a perspective on that.
Sure, Steve. But I think this kind of brings me back to one of my points that I had earlier regarding the standards. So, and it's really an interesting question about that. So the standards that you should use so you need to select a standard, let's say it that way. So let's, for example, take the Global Reporting Initiative, to just take one which is very, very much used, and so many companies, I think around 80% of the companies in Europe that report and use a reporting framework use this standard. So my advice is really to take one of these standards which is very popular, and there you have these different aspects. So you in all of those which were mentioned. So you have data which refers to your own company. So and it's I think these are two of the three pillars. So if you look at your own company, you have, of course, how do you your energy consumption, what about waste, these type of things. So this is what you can do in your own company, and this is how you can measure it. And then secondly, of course, your products. So how sustainable are your products? And then thirdly, it comes to the supply chain, so inbound and outbounds. And when you, for example, talk about greenhouse gas emissions, then there is a so-called scope 3, which refers to everything outside your organization, which can be business partners, like suppliers. It refers to logistics aspects. So when you bring a certain good from one place to the other, this has a certain emission. So I think this really well defines the areas, and most of the standards focus on these different areas. They're pretty well defined, and there are really clear KPIs behind that. So talking about external data from suppliers, because this is our speciality, there's really a whole bunch of, I think, around 90 plus KPIs available in this one standard, and there are similar ones in other standards, and they really have a clear focus. So to make an example, I think in sustainability and also for your risk management, it's very important to check the suppliers you engage with. So if it is a new and prospect suppliers, so one of the KPIs really focuses on the new suppliers. Do you check them before you engage with them, before you start business with them regarding sustainability aspects and how they're set up? So it is really about the sheer amount of how many new suppliers do I have this year, and how many of them did I really check for sustainability aspects before I engage with them as part of the pre-qualification or onboarding part. So this is just one example, but all the other KPIs are really structured in a pretty similar way. So my advice really is to take one of these standards, look at them, see which of these standards fit the best to you, and how you can. There's also a lot of tips and tricks how you really can collect the data and work with the data and make it something you can report on.
Excellent, thank you, Nick. I mean, it's a question that's been around for a long time, but those standards do give you that starting point. It's an important point you've referenced there. Sam, I want to come to you with this one. I know it's maybe too big a question for the time we've got, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. So the question goes: a challenge for procurement is how to best identify and report savings on sustainability projects when they don't involve money directly. In other words, green savings are the intangible gains of a project. So Sam, what do you think about that? I mean, this is one of the problems, right, is proving the value and really trying to sort of put some sort of figure against what we're achieving when it comes to sustainable procurement. What have you seen in terms of the work that you've been doing with some of our network?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, most of the companies that we speak to, one of the biggest challenges they have within their procurement teams is balancing better sustainability with cost management and the deliverables that they have around cost management. But the examples that I showed earlier of joint projects between procurement and suppliers that resulted in, for example, CO2 reductions and better water management, in all of those examples, there was a cost benefit as well. So the example of a beverage company working with a supplier on regulating heat in the making of glass bottles, that resulted in CO2 emissions going down, but it also resulted in cost savings that outstripped the investment into that technology. The challenge, I think, and the difficulty is that it's a longer-term benefit. That cost saving is a longer-term benefit, whereas an initial purchasing decision where you might purchase a component that is cheaper but not as sustainable, that is more instant and will count towards your KPI and your deliverable if you have a cost-saving KPI or deliverable. And what that requires, I think, is that you build a different model for how you are conducting purchasing within your procurement team. I think we heard from Marcus earlier that you are looking at cost and quality typically within procurement, but you also do need to factor in the environmental and the sustainability impact as well. So yes, weight your purchasing decisions with cost and quality, but counter sustainability in there as well. And eventually, I think there will be a cost benefit, a tangible benefit for the business, in addition to the benefit on sustainability itself.
Excellent, succinct answer to a really complex question. I mean, if people want to find out more, you should definitely reach out to Sam, because he's done a lot of work in this area and trying to understand a little bit more about how organisations are measuring it. Marcus, I know we're rounding the corner to the final question, but I wanted to put one to you. So the question again, I'll read it. Can the panel provide any advice around the best approach to change hearts and minds around sustainable and sociable value driven by procurement in a relatively immature organisation? Now, I'm coming to you, Marcus, not because I'm interested from that necessarily immature organisation perspective, but thinking about how you, as a leader within your function, could, began to think about that change hearts and minds, process. You've been, in procurement there and been CEO there for a while. How did you bring about that kind of shift in perspective and that change?
Well, actually, what changed the game was that we brought in some young people in charge of supplier sustainability in procurement, and these younger people, I should say, are really believing and are part of that generation who are believing in a better world and in a cleaner environment and in a more sustainable way of operating. And having these people in a chemical company is quite extraordinary. So we are really happy to have these in procurement, and we made them the change agents, talking to the buyers, explaining them why we're doing this, how we want to do this. We have certain programs that we are applying, we have KPIs that we are applying, but at the end of the day, the buyer has to believe that he's doing something good when he makes a real deep investigation on a supplier that he has been buying from for the last 10, 15 years, and believes that everything is great and fine. So this is, I think, what you need to have is people who believe in it, people who can talk for it and live it day in, day out.
Excellent, and that's fascinating stuff, really, because that it comes back to the point Nick was making earlier as well around you need to train, you need to educate, you need to communicate. So one of the ways you've done that is to have young, forward-looking people in your organisation, but I guess also it's making sure that everybody is kind of thinking in the same way. They're upskilling. They're not kind of looking at old ways to solve new problems, if you like. That's fascinating stuff, guys. This is all we've got time for, and apologies, we only got one question each there. Anybody who didn't get a chance to get their question answered, I know we had quite a few come in there, and we will make those available to our panels, to our panelists post-event, so they can pick any of those up if there's something they think they can get back to you on. We'll also make the slides available for those of you who tuned in today, so thank you very much. for tuning in. We'd love to hear your feedback. You can see the little note on the screen there. And the final thing to say is if you're interested in the research, you're interested in finding out a little bit more around how Procurement Leaders approaches sustainability, the sustainability content that we produce, the sustainability research that we produce, you can check out procurementleaders.com if you aren't already. If you are a member and you've tuned in today, you can find sustainability stream content on our website. If you're not, we will send you more information how you can follow up with this as well. So please do keep an eye out. We'd love to keep the conversations going. Such an important topic today. Final thing for me to say is a big thank you to our panelists today. So thank you very much to Sam Rest from Procurement Leaders. Thank you very much to Nick Heiner from Integrity Next. And thank you very much to Marcus Mergele from Clariant. Thanks, guys. Great job. And it was lovely working with you. And thank you very much to our audience. Thanks for joining us today. Guys, hopefully you took away something. You gained some insight you can take back to your organisation. That's all from me. I've been Steve Hall. Please do join us again next time.